Now, I understand we have till 11:30. Is that right? So we've got a full, nearly a full half an hour for questions. If I could ask the panelists to join at the front table. And those of you in the audience, I'm sure you've been noting down lots of questions in your notebooks. So whenever you like, we have one microphone here. Is there a second one, or just this one?
We have students that can walk around.
Yeah, so if you just raise your hands, we've got students who will come to you so you can use the microphone to ask your questions. Shyness is not rewarded, so whoever. Yes, George, and can we ask everyone to keep your question as brief as possible? And I will show you the wrap-up sign if you go a little bit too long.
Professor, I know that is meant for me.
and for me.
Okay. Well, very, very quickly. First of all, to the issue of urban settlement. How do we intend, because what we are talking about so much is really sort of the fabric, what I see. But I know that most the people dealing with urban issues, and urban issues is a major problem now, that the definition of a healthy urban area has moved away from its contribution to GDP to something, the health of the people, the social inclusion, and so on, dealing with normal problems, intangible things. Now, how do we, as planners, intend to include these particular elements of intangible into the planning of urban areas, especially using things like maybe archaeology, which takes us into deep times? How do we learn from the past to the present? Is there anything like that, or we just think about the spaces that we're dealing with currently? Then, lastly, before the wrap-up, is the question of Professor, which you have mentioned, looking at Asia. And your question is, you indicating that the fact that the Asian tourists are now going to Angkor, that is going to create a major problem. I don't know how far in time we can attribute tourism to Angkor from Asia before the Westerners went there. And your question of, can we from the West guide development in this way? Who do you mean by we from the West? Is it the intellectuals, or is it the people? Because I'm not from the West. and my understanding of that urbanism is probably very different. So are we not also putting our own traditions, our own cultures, our own understanding, our own ways of behavior, our own upbringings into the way we look at other people, which is a problem, which is the problem we'll be dealing with? Thank you very much.
Thank you. George. Ken, would you like to start?
Yeah, I didn't say that the predominance of Asians going as tourists is a problem. It's a challenge to the authorities managing these places like Apsara, because they've tended to use Western paradigms of dealing with tourists, and that has to change. So it's not a problem, it's a challenge. When I said we from the West, I would have, if I'd had more time, have qualified that, so that I don't see myself anymore in Australia as being necessarily from the West, but we've got a foot in the West and the East. My point, George, is that that I don't think that the approaches from the West that have been traditionally in urban conservation are applicable in this Asian explosion. We have to work with, as an international group, with the authorities there to see how planning regimes might be improved, because one of the problems, and this might come up when I talk about Georgetown, is the lack of planning infrastructure and planning formats in Asian countries. And you go to Cambodia, and I don't want it to be disrespectful, but many of us call it Scambodia, and it's it's a things happen there at such a rapid rate. The thing with those developments that I showed you, those multi-story developments, there is at least they are away from the historic area. They're not overpowering the historic area, I don't think I can say anything more than that, but we have to be aware that there is this enormous explosion happening in Asia, similar in Africa, but I can only talk about Asia, and find ways of working with this. And paradigm shifts, and this is what the whole paradigm is about, looking at cities as groups of people and communities, and what are their intentions for the future. And things will change.
Can I ask if anyone else on the panel wanted to reflect on the question before we go on?
I think just one quick comment on Cambodia and the Angkor experience is that, UNESCO sits in Paris. There's a Western tinge to lots of things that come out of it, and I think that's what we've all grappled with a lot, to try and be as culturally sensitive as possible. But I think in the Angkor experience, there's sort of two elements to it. One is Angkor Archaeological Park, which by and large is very well managed by Apsara National Authority, and I think that both the Cambodian professionals and 20 years of international expertise assisting has set a framework for managing Angkor that's actually reasonably effective. And I will say that of the 2 million tourists a year, 500,000 of them are Cambodians themselves. So this is a very heavily visited site, not just by international tourists, but by Cambodians themselves, because it's still a site of active worship and veneration. So there are a lot of ways in which people experience Angkor that needs to be managed. And the problems in Phnom Penh was one of the most horrifying experiences ever. When I went there for the first time, I thought I would die every time I needed to cross the street, because there just seemed to be such utter chaos. And I think that, what you feel in a city like Phnom Penh, and even in Siem Reap, which is a much smaller place, is that lack of planning and structure is at odds with the very careful management of the archaeological resource. And so there has been an explosion in a lot of places in Asia, and Phnom Penh and Siem Reap are emblematic of needing better tools so that when that wealth comes and when the explosion of tourists come and the densification of the city comes, there's some way to manage it in place, and that's what's lacking.
Nalini, yes.
See, I don't think there's any other way but that the local community have to determine their ways of doing things. And for doing that, we need to inform them. And the one is the hardware of heritage resources, because being a conservator, I think it's very important to get that sort of into a knowledge, into the information, so that it can be processed into knowledge, and it can go back to the local people. Because from those people, you will have the future planners, you will have the future researchers, and then the way to interface with the problems in planning and all can be done. I think one has to do that, and even if it takes, say, 20 years. So, and that is a responsibility. I don't know. I mean, one should put time for that and put effort for that, and sometimes not go for anything which is short term. We're talking about long term.
Please.
Hi, Murph Tano from Denver, Colorado. This is directed primarily at Julian Smith. Asking, sir, what your reaction would be to the proposition that your point about engaging indigenous peoples is their participation has moved more toward a decolonization and nation-building enterprise, if you will.
I think one of the interesting things that's happened at Willowbank, where I teach, and which is really an alternative school of architecture and planning, and students start by learning to be masons and carpenters, which I consider a fundamental to being a planner. When we started there 6 years ago, we have 4 Aboriginal instructors, and when they came to teach, their perspective was seen as an interesting counterpoint to a more Eurocentric perspective on the heritage conservation field. Even within this last 5 or 6 years, I think the students now who are there, and we've expanded a great deal, we have a large number of students, they've heard the word ecology, they've heard questions about culture and nature since they were in kindergarten. They're really a new generation. They're very impatient. They know the planet will not survive if they're not impatient. And they're, I think, the first generation since the 60s that don't trust anyone over 30, and they're tough for us to deal with. But for them now, the Aboriginal mentors that they have who come right at the beginning of their first year are in fact giving them the paradigm for their entire educational perspective, because they bring culture and nature and cultural practice and contemporary thinking in an integrated way. And so I think that's a major shift for us in Canada. It's now a fundamental approach. So it's, but beyond that, I mean, it's no longer, Lisa Prosper, for example, who's Aboriginal, doesn't self-identify as Aboriginal when she teaches at our school. In fact, when she speaks, many people have no idea she's Aboriginal. And I think that's important. It's just that their voice is really important. And I just wanted to make, it's sort of related, a quick comment to the question about how do we deal with planning issues. What I say to our students, if you're going to understand the cultural landscape framework, your responsibility once you graduate is to become the head of the organizations and cities that think about the futures of the cities, but the planners are going to report to you, and the heritage planners are going to report to you. Because one of the things, if you train to be a heritage planner, you're always going to be head of the heritage subcommittee unit of the planning department. The planning profession is in pretty much disarray, and I think their accomplishments in the 20th century have very little, they have very little to show for it that is good. Urban agriculture was basically erased by planners. I mean, it's amazing what they've done in the 20th century. So I really think that it's not just that there's a paradigm shift within the heritage field. I think the planning field is ready for a paradigm shift. And that is talking about communities who are wanting to take over a different role. And certainly the questioning of experts, which is something that is fundamental to the Aboriginal community, because they have suffered at the hands of experts longer than anyone in Canada for 400 years. This young generation is certainly questioning some of the traditional roles of experts and of hierarchy. So,
great. Yes, right here in the front row.
Wonderful panel, and can you hear me? Okay. Very wide range of topics discussed.
Sorry, you just have to project.
All right, I will project. I think the range of presentations was fascinating, and one thing that stands out to me is clearly the world that we live in is rapidly urbanizing, and the people who live in urban areas are in flux. What is community? Is it the community of people who live there forever? Is it the community of immigrants? Is it the community who have not immigrated officially in limbo? What is community? So I think there has to be a very strong framework of defining what is community. Once we've done that, I think there's a need to mitigate the difference between community and the national. And I think that we can't cast this argument or this search for giving a framework within the division of East and West. Clearly, we can't do that. I think we should do that. I take myself as an example, and feel free to raise the wrap-up thing as soon as you want to. But, I'm supposed to be Pakistani. I don't believe Pakistani. I don't believe in the country of Pakistan because it destroyed the region. So it's a very important issue in the contemporary world
let's give them. It's a fantastic question. You put a very fine point on it. So thank you so much. But now for the solutions.
Maybe more questions. I just wanted to say that I think you posed your first point about defining community as if we could define it and move on. And I think that's incorrect. I think we constantly define and redefine community for those who are of the community. I mean, we're a community in this room because of our values. We're here today on a Saturday. I have community at all sorts of levels. My international colleagues that I work on with committees, my neighbors, you know, it's sort of all over the place. So I think the topic, the cause, the work we're trying to do defines the community of interest. And one of the problems with our field is that, as Lisa Ackerman mentioned several times, we talk amongst ourselves, and we're not at the table with the decision makers or those with the money to do the big development project that's going to destroy the community. So maybe it's time for us to take a, and I think this has happened in the past, but maybe we don't state it, that in our field, we have to operate from every level. We have to be at, you know, some of us may choose to be the community activist level that helps the community that has values to work against or with the development proposal. Some of us have to be, you know, advising on the big development team to say, hey, heritage values need to be retained as we move forward with this growth. So I think it's a very complex frame that we find ourselves in, and we bring our skills and our values to those frames. And I would suggest that because our topic here is Hull, that I appreciated very much the contributions of all my colleagues. And what I was trying to do was say, here is Hull. It's new, and it has a paradigm shift in it that is really important. It may not be as far as we want to be, and it's not necessarily landlocked to sea, and viewpoint from the water and lack of political boundaries and nation states. But it is something that we could share globally as inspiration, and it only works and transmutes to better tools if we apply it. So part of having Hull as a panel in this, and part of my discussion with Archer early on, was to make sure we focused a bit on this new tool and instrument, is to say, okay, so we can all hold up this thing and say, hey, the intent here is to have development and conservation and sustainability and quality of life and touristic experience integrated. Can we work on this? Could we dialogue about this integration? Can we find a way toward this integration? Is there a series of ways that we can communicate with each other in real time, in social media, whatever, to go to a future of integration? That, to me, is the big message.
Anyone else in the panel, briefly, before we have a couple more questions?
No. I think I have broken that whole thing about the nation state by going to decentralization and an integrated way of doing things at a very local context, decentralized level, where you have both community, the time, history, and geography all given equal standing. And through that, you can talk about any time when there were different people, what they were, everything. And then, but you are empowering them, because finally, they are the ones who are going to take the decisions. I think in Hull, we have to take some decisions about these things and not talk postmodern all the time, this and that. I think I would say you need integrated conservation, integrated approach, and you need mechanisms like interfacing with different sectors of the planning so that you can get something that is better and useful. And then we are talking about Gandhian decentralization, because that's the only way Hull can be.
Okay. Ken?
Yeah, for me, there's no such thing as community. There are communities, even in a block of flats. There'll be more than one community. The point that for me is that paradigms like Hull are important. International, movements. The work of UNESCO and ICOMOS has set down, and IUCN, best practice, if you like, international ways of doing it. The important thing is that then those are shifted to the regions of the world, and you apply local values. What's behind my talk of these what might seem to be shocking developments in Asian cities is this is happening. We need to be teaching these ideas within the Asian schools. Okay, you were lucky to be educated in the West, if you see it that way. But teaching in Bangkok, I know how important it is to get the students to bring forward their local values and translate those into how we're going to make things like Hull work, and how we're going to deal with planning in Asian cities, and having planners who are, in fact, attuned to heritage needs. And just one last thing. Just the day before I left Australia to come here, I got a phone call from Melbourne University, where they probably have more Asian students doing architecture and planning than Australian students, and they're getting worried that they're just teaching in an Australian way rather than in an Asian way. So they're going to have a big workshop next year on how to convert their teaching to be more attuned to Asian needs.
We've got at least one final question here before time's out, and I've asked her to come down to use the microphone.
Oh wow, thank you. I feel so special. So I have to ask a very good question. My name is Yue Zhang from the University of Illinois in Chicago. I think when we talk about the preservation of urban landscape, in the urban setting, a very important question facing us is oftentimes the most valuable and important urban heritage or historical sectors or historical quarters, they're actually also the most dilapidated parts of the city. In other words, they're often in very bad shapes. So oftentimes, those old urban quarters or historical districts are demolished by the government in the name of improving the living qualities of the citizens. So I think that's a really big challenge here, like how to maintain the physical form of the city and also to improve the living quality of the citizens. So I want to hear some comments from our panels. And a more specific question is, recently I heard many things about what happens in Rio, because we know it's the host city for the Olympics in a few years. And actually a large urban area surrounding the center of the city is called Falavi, in Portuguese means the slum areas. Those are actually designated by UNESCO as a World Heritage Site. But I think the plan of the Brazilian government is actually to demolish part of it, to improve the quality of the living conditions and also to prepare for the Olympics. So, something happened in Beijing a few years ago. So I wonder if, our panelists can share some of your insights and knowledge about what happens or what will happen in Rio. Thank you.
Julian, thanks.
A couple of quick comments. Arish Dastur at the World Bank recently wrote a book on slums as an example of a high level of natural and cultural resource conservation and how intricate they are. And I think there's a beginning of a shift to actually recognize, first of all, that some of these places that appear to be unsuitable are in fact extremely efficient. This Kensington Market that I'm working on is a very poor area in Toronto and is the home of anarchists. And in the 1860s, it was Jewish anarchists. In the early 20th century, Portuguese anarchists, currently Vietnamese anarchists. They can only afford to live in very low rent areas. So one of our approaches will be to ensure that the city spends no money in that area so that it remains low rent. We were able to do that in the Byward Market area in Ottawa, where we convinced the city absolutely not to spend the $10 million they were going to spend to put in brick paving and cast iron street lamps in order to keep the rents low, and it's still working as a place of immigrant culture. So I think there are first is a step that we have to take, and the heritage field has often been responsible for the gentrification and for the idea that our role is to upgrade the aesthetics. And I think that's where this ecological approach, you have to understand how people occupy an area, and often that is the beginning of a conversation which allows you to say these areas can have very minimal, for example, clean water and sewer systems, infrastructure, and then allow the residents themselves to continue doing what they've always done, which is to use master builders. I mean, another objective we have at Willowbank is to displace architects with master builders.
Well, and I think they're actually, while it is true that, you know, in the name of urban renewal, a lot of important historic neighborhoods have been lost, I think the thinking has evolved there too. And I think the Aga Contrast for Culture Historic Cities program is a very good example wherein both Cairo and Delhi, they've done two extremely important projects that have used preservation as part of an urban renewal program, but it's meant to keep everybody in place. It's in Cairo specifically, it was to assure that the medieval section of Cairo was not demolished in the name of new housing, and it was very much about demonstrating these houses were perfectly adaptable to modern life, and it was about an investment in the community. And in that case, the community was the people living there. And I think in the area surrounding Humayun's tomb, much the same, while they were involved in a conservation project for Humayun's tomb and the surrounding landscape, there was an equally important adjacent community effort, again, looking at the infrastructure needs of a community. And I will say, you know, as somebody who has lived in New York City for a long time, one of the mantras of the preservation movement in New York City is the best thing that happens to historic neighborhoods is an economic downturn, because it's usually that moment when you can go in and very effectively try and save neighborhoods. And obviously New York City is filled with modern and contemporary buildings, and it's that balance, but it is also in part because of the rent control laws that were in place for a very long time. So you really couldn't easily displace entire communities in New York City because there was another force that was keeping those communities intact.
So quick on Rio, the World Heritage nomination for Rio is the sea, the massifs, the shore, particularly Burle Marx's Flamenco Park and Copacabana Beach. It is and the Tijuca Forest, 7,000 acres, 2,500 hectares of forest. It is not including the favelas. It does not include the city. The favelas and the city form are in the buffer zone. So just to correct that misstatement, which I'm sure is based on the fact that Rio would say, we're a World Heritage City now. So it was clear to us, and it was actually a fairly clever way of framing Rio, that the idea was that the shoreline and the iconic massifs and the forest could be managed. And the city form simply was the intent long-term, not to intrude and upset the balance of those two relationships.
Well, okay, 30 seconds.
You know, even a very run-down part of the old city.
It's too close.
Yeah, even a very run-down part of the old city, the architectural knowledge of those houses or fabric will be at least 200 years old. And I think either we respect cultural heritage or not. You know, so this is an attitude. And with this attitude, you bring in a new way of doing things, that is to look after them, and you generate the knowledge by making a method for it. And, you know, I think this hull is applicable also for rural regions, and not just for urban landscape, because I'm getting a bit nervous about that, because it's again cutting, you know, or dividing. It shouldn't be.
Okay, thank you. So with these fantastic presentations and excellent questions in mind, let's go on to a break, and I'm sure they'll all be taken up later today. But thank you very much to the five of you.